the Los Alamos Daily Post video conversations with local candidates. We have with us here tonight Jim Hall and Stephanie Garcia Richard, who are running for the New Mexico House of Representatives, District 43. Welcome, Jim and Stephanie.
Thank you.
My co-host tonight is Greg Kendall, and I'm Bonnie Gordon.
So we'll get started with question number one.
Okay.
All right. What are some of your top legislative priorities for the next House session, if you're elected, and how are you uniquely qualified to tackle those priorities? And either of you can start.
I don't care. I'll start this one, and you can start the next one. How about that? You know, if I'm elected, the top priorities, I think, in the state of New Mexico and for the district as well, are two things. One is jobs. I mean, I'm just going to list two. There's a whole bunch of other things that are going to come up, and we all know that are going to come up. Let's talk about the focus here. And it seems to me that the primary one is jobs. And New Mexico has a jobs problem. We have the lowest employment participation rate, second lowest employment participation rate in the United States, of any state. So we don't have that many people working. And there's many problems with that. You know, people who aren't working, who don't have jobs, depressed job market, those concerns. Also, of course, it's about 60% of our tax revenue comes in from the gross receipts taxes and income tax, personal income tax. That's directly related to the number of jobs we have. And so growing jobs, I think two things. One is maintaining jobs, especially Atlanta, which is the job engine for northern New Mexico, much of northern New Mexico. And then the other thing is growing jobs throughout the state, as well as more jobs in the district. Now, you say, well, how do you grow jobs? Well, I think these days we have to grow private jobs. You know, the model we've had for many, many years, where the business of New Mexico is government, is not a sustainable model anymore. We have about 40% of our wages in this state come from federal money. Huge amount comes from federal money. And so in some sense, the federal government has been our best customer in New Mexico. And we've done a good job for them. We have bases, we have labs, we have forests that are very attractive to people, those kinds of things. But I think for us to maintain this dependence on federal funding is just unreasonable for jobs. So I think it has to be private sector jobs. And that gets into the next issues, I think. If you ask private sector employers, what makes a difference for them, is they will say three things. Three things sort of consistently, a whole bunch of things come up, but three things bubble to the top for most of them. And one is the education system that we have. Creating a skilled workforce, that they can get the skills without additional training and so on. That's the first one, and that's part of the reason why K through 12, only part of the reason, but part of the reason, why K through 12 education is sort of the second priority. The other two things are our business tax system, which is Byzantine, and I don't think it's fair. And the third issue is the regulatory system that we face. So let me just, I mean, there's a bunch, lots of many other things that have come up. I mean, we're going to see driver's licenses for undocumented aliens. We're going to see health care and Medicaid, and on and on. But let's just start with those two.
Okay. Well, let's talk about how you're uniquely qualified for tackling your big issues.
All right. Well, a couple things I think. One is that, you know, I basically have a record of public service which spans many of these areas. Just start off with the school board. Well, let me back up. First of all, I worked at Lama for many years and did an early retirement from Lama. I basically ran a division at Lama. So I think I understand the lab, its ways, how it works, and so on. So I've got the National Lab background. I've got a consulting background where I actually worked with the Department of Energy as a consultant. In fact, one of my major roles there was to work between the Department of Energy and the Department of State in Moscow. The third thing, of course, during that consulting period, I was acting IT director for the New Mexico Supreme Court for 9 months, helping them implement the first statewide tort system. And then, of course, I was in Gary Johnson's cabinet for 3.5 years. So I understand the executive side and how it thinks and what it focuses on. Finally, I understand local government, how to work with local governments. On school board for 8 years. So that's to have some, I think, pretty deep understanding of school policy and making changes in school systems and how they react to that. I was on the county council where we tried to create jobs, and some of the things that the council tried to do were very unsuccessful, and some of the things have been more successful. So there's some experimentation. Plus, my wife and I owned a small business for several years and actually had practice in small business operation and how that works. So that's just some of the background I've had in terms of dealing with the job sector. And then during this past session, of course, we had a lot of issues about jobs. We simplified the gross receipts taxes for some businesses. We actually tried to change things so that out-of-state corporations would not have the advantage that they have had. We changed the wording of the law so in-state corporations really got the preference they were supposed to have. And those were the kinds of things that we did in the last session.
Well, let's turn to Stephanie and get her priorities for the next House session and your qualifications.
Okay, thank you, Greg.
Sure.
So I do agree that, you know, as I'm walking around throughout the district, throughout District 43 and talking with folks at their homes, what I hear back the most from voters in this district is that their major concern is job growth, and that we have not seen leadership from the New Mexico State Legislature in this venue. And I do agree with supporting private industry, but I would like to take it a step further and really focus on our small business development here, especially in District 43. We have a thriving small business community here in Los Alamos. There is also a thriving small business community in Cuba, one in Jemez Springs, and it would really behoove us, I think, to support those folks in their endeavors, because research tells us that those are the #1 engines of job growth in the country. They're the ones who hire the most folks. And so, you know, we kind of get that double benefit of helping our small businesses, but also growing jobs. And the way I see to do that, I do agree with tax reform, and, you know, in my opinion, what needs to happen is a level playing field. What you see is big box corporations don't have to pay state income tax. That's just the bottom line. It's written into the state code. So you walking down Central Avenue here, you look at Starbucks and Ruby Case. Starbucks pays state income tax. Starbucks does not have to pay state income tax. Ruby does. You look at Ottawa and Bell's. Bell's does not have to pay state income tax, and Ottawa does.
With Kroger?
What Kroger does not. Kroger does not. All of the corporations that have their corporate headquarters outside of New Mexico do not pay our state income tax. So just in the last legislative session, there was a bill that not only would have made big box stores have to pay their fair share, it would have also lowered the tax rate for our New Mexico state-owned businesses. It would have lowered their income tax rate. And when I talked to Ruby Alexander, I mean, you know, what she says is what keeps her up at night is her tax rate. She's penalized. The more she makes, the more she has to pay.
How about internet companies? Would it be the same?
Actually, that is actually another you know, great endeavor that has been addressed, is to go after, you know, those companies or actually the customers who buy products in New Mexico, and see if we can't get them you know, to pay a little bit of the share as well, because, you know, that's all revenue being generated in our state. So if everyone else has to give a portion of their revenue that's generated in our state, I think that, you know, we should play fair, basically. Yeah, so supporting small businesses that way. But, you know, again, the representative is right when you say that the underpinning of all of these issues really is the strength of our education system. You know, that when job growers look, when industry looks at our state, one of the number one things they look at is the quality of our education system. And at this point, it's not matching up. We are not ensuring that every child in this state has access to quality education. And so as you know, a classroom teacher, and you spoke about how am I uniquely qualified for some of these issues that I'm bringing up, I believe that I'm uniquely qualified first and foremost in educational policy. I see the way policy really hits a classroom, how it affects my families, how it's going to affect the students in my classroom. And so some of the reforms that I have talked about as I'm, you know, talking with voters at their door, one of them is universal pre-K. We have seen the benefits through, you know, research on how pre-K really can influence, make or break the rest of a child's educational career. And then another thing that I talk about is increased VOTEC training. Not everyone wants to go to college in the state of New Mexico, and there are good, you know, well-paying jobs that could use technical training. And so I would love to see some of those programs. I would love to see us leverage our branch universities and colleges to help support some of those programs, VOTEC programs. And then again, I agree with the representative that we must do everything that we can to support the lab. That, you know, it's the bread and butter of this community. It is crucial to the future of the families here in Los Alamos that we do everything we can to support the lab. Unfortunately, we have lost the seniority that we had in DC. They're the ones that, you know, paved the way and spoke for the lab up in DC, but I think it's up to the representative of Los Alamos to build coalition, to find local and national leaders who, you know, share a common ground, have a support, and build a support structure for the lab. So those are kind of my priorities. Okay. The way I think I'm uniquely qualified, once again, I did say that I'm a school teacher, so I feel that I'm uniquely qualified, especially around education. But our state constitution calls for our legislature to be what is known as a citizen legislature, and those are the words that it's called for in the Constitution. And to me, what that means is folks come with various backgrounds, with various experiences, to come together in Santa Fe to try to make the best policy for the people of the state of New Mexico. And, you know, I'm a working parent. I have kids here in the school district, and all of those needs are very immediate to me. I understand what other working families are going through in Los Alamos and in District 43.
Okay, thanks. And Bonnie has the next question.
Tell us a little bit about your personal beliefs and how they'll factor into your legislative choices. We have some big issues that we'd like you to touch on. The first one is the potential Medicare expansion. You want to talk a little bit about how you feel about that? And
Medicaid.
The Medicaid, yeah.
I'm sorry,
Medicaid.
Medicaid.
We always get confused.
I misspoke.
So, Stephanie, why don't you go ahead and...
Okay, well, I just want to say that sort of underpinning the way that I make all of my decisions is you know, has to do with the values that I'm bringing to these decisions. My uncle asked me once, you know, why are you running as a Democrat? And I said, Theo, you know who raised me. I mean, you must know the values that they gave me, and those are the very same values that I have today, you know, that we need to help each other out. We're all in the same boat. You know, we don't make our success at the expense of someone else, those kinds of things. So when you talk about Medicaid, Medicaid services the most vulnerable of our population here in the state. And we have a large number of uninsured people, people who completely have no insurance at all. And so Medicaid, the expansion of Medicaid, I completely support, because that will go a long way in ensuring that a lot of our uninsured folks here in the state will have access to quality health care. And, you know, I mean, that impacts so many other things. That means that they can be productive members of society. That means that, you know, they can take care and take care of and raise their children. So all of those things, you know, go back to access to quality health care. So I'm fully in support of that.
You're in support, okay.
How about you, Jim? What are your thoughts?
Well, a couple things. I think the first issue about about values and so on. My father and grandfather were both Presbyterian ministers, and then my mother was a school teacher. And so there was some, and my father did a lot of work. When he was starting, he didn't make enough money as a minister, so he worked in the oil fields, worked on the fishing boats out of Alaska, so on and so forth. So, you know, I grew up with that put two things into me, I think. One was the value of just hard work. You know, I grew up, I started selling magazines door to door as soon as I could count change when I was 7 years old. From then on, I've worked janitor, I cut firewood in high school, I cut and sold firewood, worked construction, those sorts of things, worked as a state forest firefighter. So one thing is just, I earned my own way through college and graduate school. So that sort of New Mexico self-reliance, and this is the way it works, is part of it. The other part, of course, is that when you grow up in a Presbyterian minister's house, you learn about taking care of others. And you learn about helping people through the hard times and those sorts of things. And so I'm very alert to the things that discriminate against the less fortunate in our society. And I've always been committed to fighting those. Let's talk about Medicaid. Medicaid was started off as a program for poor children. You go back to the very beginnings of Medicaid, and it was a program to take care of poor children. And what it's morphed into is a program to take care of old adults. That's where most of the money goes. A program
Not to Medicare?
Medicaid. No, Medicaid, Medicare does not pay for nursing homes.
Well, yeah.
Medicaid does pay for nursing homes. And if you look at where an awful lot of the money goes, it's for older adults with multiple morbidities. In fact, if you look at it, now this is a nationwide number, Medicaid costs about $475 billion. Okay, 1% of the people on Medicaid take 25% of that amount of money. And they're almost all elderly adults with multiple morbidities. Often, I'm sorry to say, come from lifestyle habits, diabetes, COPD, etc. They're in nursing homes and so on and so forth. So anyway, Medicaid is becoming, for most states, for almost all states I think, Medicaid is the largest single line item in their budget, even though the feds pay the majority of the amount. The state general fund,
Medicaid.
Medicaid is the largest. The only reason that it's not the largest item in our budget is because of the way we fund education out of the general fund. And so Medicaid has shown an enormous growth. And so and this is the background to where I'm going on Medicaid, is that if you look at the last 10 years, remember, Medicaid is an entitlement program. You set eligibility levels, and anybody who meets that signs up for it, and then you pay the price. And so what's happened in the last 10 years is that Medicaid has grown by about 90%. The next greatest thing is the law enforcement, which has grown about 50%. K through 12 education, which is so valuable to all of us, has grown by 34% in general funding. This is all general fund funding. And there's federal funds that come into all of this stuff.
You're just talking about our budget in
Our
Mexico.
budget, just our general fund, 90% growth. Okay? And so what that means, and it continues to grow, and it will continue to grow. There has been a reform proposal put in for Medicaid. So let's come to Medicaid expansion, which is under the PPACA, Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act.
That's Obama's, let's call it Obamacare.
Call it what you will. Okay, and states have a choice. And I support the expansion of Medicaid, make that clear, with the caveat that we have to do some reforms in Medicaid. Because if we don't do the reforms, and you run the numbers, in 2020, Medicaid will chew up another $500 million a year annually out of our budget. Okay? Now there's two reasons. One is that federal support drops off slightly. in the last few years of Medicaid expansion. But the other is the organic growth that goes on in Medicaid, whether we sign up for the PPACA or not. There is organic growth that will go on. Now, I think that there are some reforms. This, by the way, this is a nationwide problem. I've been in a conference in Washington, D.C. on Medicaid, where states are looking at ways to get control of these costs. And there are actually some success without harming either quality or delivery. So, long story, but, and by the way, it's not just Medicaid. It's also the health insurance exchange program, which I think will help. Okay, in fact, tomorrow morning, I'm on the design team of the health insurance exchange program in Santa Fe. So I'll be going to a conference down there on that. It's about how you contract for Medicaid services, etc. So that is a long answer. I'm sorry, but Medicaid is this huge issue for all states, and especially for New Mexico. It will benefit New Mexicans if we can do it right.
Any particular reform? I'm sorry.
Well, I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to say, if we're going to expand it into talking about the
Yeah.
Affordable Care Act, then there's a couple of things a couple of points I would like to make as well.
Sure.
Number one, some of the reforms that I have seen proposed have to do with direction of care. So how is care given? Is it something that is preventive, or is it something that hits the problem after it hits the emergency room, and we're coming down to those things. So I would love to see a reform as well, but I would love to see something that really hits the preventative side of some of these issues. And I just don't agree with you when you say that that diabetes is due to a lifestyle choice. I mean, we know that there's a genetic component to diabetes, and that, talking about that issue in our state, that is really one of our critical issues that impacts so many of the populations in our state that are our most vulnerable. So bottom line for me still is caring for people. How are we going to ensure that people have access to quality care? Is still the bottom line. So
And I think this is a good discussion, because clearly diabetes has a genetic component. Both diabetes type 1 and diabetes type 2 both have genetic components. However, diabetes type 2 is, for most people, clearly has a lifestyle component as well. And so anything we can do to encourage people to avoid
for sure.
getting
So
diabetes,
that comes in the preventive.
that comes on the preventive side, and I think that's important. And one of the things they're doing, and there's an article by Eitan Gawande in the New Yorker called Hotspotting, which I recommend that anybody concerned about this issue read this article in the New Yorker about hotspotting. Because when you go to the national conferences, all you hear is about hotspotting, and what that is putting much more emphasis on case management of individuals. Because what we see now is, of course, you'll have individuals, for example, there'll be individuals in this state that cost us over $500,000 a year for that individual for medical care, year after year after year. And what they're doing is really putting in, and what part of the proposal is to really aggressively try and do case management with these high-cost individuals.
You're using like your community health workers, you're using exercise, diet,
Right.
counseling, those kinds of things.
And in fact, one of the things I'm pushing, I've been part of the Los Alamos Community Health Council now for some time. And what that does, that council, run by Ann Eden, is, I think, part of the future of medical care in the state, medical care in the nation, where it brings together more than just doctors, because many of these people have social pathologies as well. Behavioral issues, dealing with paying rent, paying their utilities, all these kinds of issues that they're having to deal with, and trying to get a unified case management system.
So this is a more holistic look.
Much more of a holistic
And are you
look.
talking about also medical software or tracking, that type of?
I came out of the IT world, okay, and I have seen enormous instances of overselling the benefits of IT. Okay? So you're going to find me very reluctant to say, here's the magic bullet,
Okay.
we have an IT system for you. And being in the field, you can make things work, and it's very good somewhere. But that will be part of an answer.
So more of an expert-based system that would.
Well, I think an awful lot of what I call a case, there's a woman over in Cuba named Janet Linville, who really is what I call a case manager for the elderly.
Okay.
She understands Medicare, and she understands Medicaid, and she's able to bring together disparate capabilities in food bank and so on for these people, and that's the kind of thing we need to do.
Yeah, they're doing that kind of work down in Lordsburg in the Hidalgo Medical Services, HMS, Hidalgo County Medical Services, and they've actually seen, you'll love this, and you probably know, but they've seen a savings in their Medicaid payouts to doctors.
So you both are in somewhat of agreement on,
Sure.
on the case management piece of this?
I love hearing the case management piece. I just want to see more preventive, heavy care.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
And I think that will come out of case management.
Well, why don't we move on to the
Yeah.
next one?
I think we're being encouraged to move on.
Yeah, well, sorry, but we do have time to,
Well, I get to ask the tough question here, or one of the tough questions, which is, where do you stand on women's reproductive rights?
I decided to go first this time, right?
You get to go first.
Okay.
and we're talking in the terms of your personal beliefs and how they factor into your legislation that you would do in the term, in the session.
The only real change in the legislation, and remember, most of this is at the federal level, okay? So it's just where most of it happens.
Right.
So the state legislature does not have a whole lot of flexibility here, but they do have some. The only place that I would advocate for legislation in this area is notifying parents of minors when their child is going to have an abortion, or is before they have an abortion. I'm sorry, I look at it and I say, and I will add a caveat to that, but I look at it and I say, look, you can't give a child a pill without a parent approval. You can't, schools, you know, if a child falls and skins their knee, you just about can't do anything with that without parental approval. So the idea that we can't have, the parent should not have the approval for a daughter.
What age limit were you looking at?
Well, if you look at the schools and what the Schools Act, it is up to 18. Okay, I mean that's the way it is. So up until they reach the majority. Now I think there's a caveat there. That clearly there's some children with legitimate concerns about how their parents react. And I think there should be an express way for a child in that situation with adult counseling and so on, and appropriate action to bypass that. My opinion, however, is normally if that child is doing that, there's a lot worse problems going on in that family than simply whether that child gets an abortion or not.
So just to be clear, you think that there could be some instances where parental notification is bypassed?
Yes.
Okay.
I clearly think, well, and I think usually in those cases, there's other bad things going on in that family. I mean, I look at all the parents I've known, and I look at all the daughters who've had issues I've known, and so on. And in most cases, the parents have been a very supportive and positive factor in that child finding the way out of it, one way or another.
Who'd make that decision, Jim, as far as whether or not the
Actually, a good
parents
question. Yeah.
need to be notified?
I think that normally, usually what happens now is it shows up to a school counselor is the most common place. I mean, it kind of shows up other places, sometimes to a minister and sometimes to a school counselor. And, you know, they talk to their friends and it bubbles up somewhere. But almost any adult, I think, should be able to, that child takes the adult into their confidence, should have the training to try and help the child through that time. I just believe that without some formal intervention, without some formal thing going on, I'm hesitant to lay out the exact thing, the parents, I mean, we have this dichotomy which seems to me incredible. You can't hardly do anything with a child medically except this. And this is a big issue, both emotionally and medically.
Do you want to address this issue?
Yes,
Stephanie?
yes, thanks, Bonnie. So for me, I agree that most of these issues are, held at the federal level. And, you know, the state complies with Roe v. Wade and everything that's federally, comes down from the feds. But in parental notification, that is one place where New Mexico has some sway. And I am actually against a parental notification bill, and the reason is this. Personally, and I know anecdotally, there have been young women who feel they cannot possibly ever approach their parents. It could be because one of the parents is involved. And in that case, I would much rather have a young woman be safe than not safe.
And I fully agree with her on that. Okay, I absolutely, I mean, that's why I think that there needs to be a track for things like, right, especially parental involvement. In fact, one of my, something that I'm just hard over on, is that if there isn't parental involvement, then law enforcement gets involved
That's,
in a major way. I mean, I
the
just
issue.
have no,
We need to be protecting our children.
absolutely.
Well, just real quickly, because we want to get to the next thing, and these are very big, I mean, it's hard to talk about these without going into
Yeah, we can do
detail.
a half an hour on each one of these.
Yes, but the potentially, depending on how things go in the Supreme Court and the election, potentially the states could have more of a role in deciding these issues of women's reproductive lives. I mean, that potentially, in your term and maybe a successive term, these issues could come to the state level, some of the, the big issues. And I'm just wondering, where would you stand? Would you want to make changes, big changes,
You know,
to the way women's reproductive rights are handled?
You know, Greg, that's a very hypothetical question. I don't.
It's very
I
hypothetical.
think,
Yes, I agree.
I think the chance of Roe versus Wade being overturned is somewhere between slim and none. And so I think what we do is that there are issues which the states do have some input in. But I think on the fundamental thing here, and I consider that settled law.
Okay. All right. Great. I'll go on to the next one unless you have anything else. Let's talk about illegal immigration and driver's licensing for a moment.
Okay.
And I would like to get your feelings on changes you would like to see or not see. Stephanie, if you'd like to begin.
Okay, I can start. So, as I have said before, and I've said this in public statements and with folks at the doors, I would support a repeal of driver's licenses. But as I go and talk with folks at their door, that is not really the main issue that they're trying to get around. So, we keep coming back to the issue, and I think that there are other issues that are more pressing to the people of the state of New Mexico, and so I do support repeal, but I'd like to move on from that issue to other more pressing issues.
Okay.
And I actually think that this is for many people, especially undocumented aliens in our state, this is a pressing issue. And I think it is somewhat for law enforcement and so on as well. All too often, especially with drunk drivers, you stop drunk drivers and don't know who they are. And they get false IDs and so on. So I think the idea that everybody driving has a permit or a license is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people may be astonished at that, but let me make it clear. I support repeal of driver's licenses. And one major reason is that our current driver's license does not meet the federal Real ID Act. This is a law passed that set very strict standards on issuing driver's licenses, federal law. And they keep delaying implementation for the obvious reasons. If the feds ever decide to implement this law, if you're here in New Mexico, you're going to need a passport to get on an airplane because the driver's license is used for that. Because we do not meet the requirements of the federal Real ID Act. So, what I would support, I support repeal of New Mexico driver's licenses being issued to undocumented aliens. What I could support, I think this is a doable thing, a tightly controlled driver's permit for proven residents. A permit, proven residents, so we don't have people flying in here from New York and getting driver's permits, who refuse to or are unable to prove citizenship. I have met people who occasionally say, oh, yeah, I'm a citizen, but I'm not gonna give those people my social security number, okay? As far as I'm concerned, for them to have a driver's permit,
So they don't get a New Mexico driver's license, huh?
they rant and rave about it. All right, fine, you get a driver's permit, but I put strict things on that. Or maybe you have to renew, you can get a driver's license here in New Mexico for 8 years. So I just assumed a shorter time frame. The other thing is I would not, on the permit, I would only say you can drive in the state of New Mexico with this permit. And the reason is, I don't think we can impose our views on other states. Just like, you know, when there was this, when the Texas people were trying to do a compact so that their right to carry
Transferred.
transferred in Mexico,
Mexico.
government said no, you know, because our rules may not be the same as yours. Same way on these driver's permits. You say, okay, you can drive in the state of New Mexico. And I think just given the number of undocumented workers we have in this state, I think that'd be wise.
So the workers could have a way to drive, but they would have to go through this, get this permit.
They get a permit, they take driver's tests, they take the driving test, the driving test, they would take, they'd have to get insurance, okay, and it would just, that's,
And it's temporary, that's what you're saying.
well, it's like 2 years maybe, or a year. I
Not
mean,
as long a duration.
Not as long as 8 years,
Uh-huh.
okay, because, and so I think that would be, and I would not prejudice it by saying this is only for undocumented workers. As I say, I know a few people who are very concerned about any government knowledge. Anyway.
Okay, unless there's anything else, go on to let's talk about the educational system and how you would each suggest that we improve the New Mexico educational system, or things that you'd like to see changed. I guess, Jim, you go?
I'd like to start off with a flip comment and say darn near everything, but I won't do that.
Darn near everything changed.
Well, yeah, that's right. No, seriously, let's talk about. So I consulted with probably 100 different organizations in the last 20 years, of all sorts. I mean, businesses, federal agencies, state agencies, so on and so forth. And you know, there's a couple of kinds of organizations. One kind of organization is what I would call a transformational organization. It transforms people's lives. A number of nonprofits, I consulted with a bunch of nonprofits. And the other is what I call a caretaker organization. We just caretake, they try not to do any damage as the people go through the organization. And I think too many of our schools are caretaker organizations and not enough for transformation. So fundamentally where I am with it is I believe that student achievement is, this is all about student achievement. And student achievement comes from having well-trained, motivated teachers spending the maximum amount of time with students, and those teachers need to be well supported by administration and parents. And so I think we focus on that goal. And 3 things for schools, and this I could go on for a long time. So anyway, let me be quick. I see a little bit about time, but anyway, I think there's three things that will really make a difference for schools, and that is offering schools a lot of flexibility in almost everything they do. Okay, things happen. People at the school level know what's going on with their kids, and they should have a lot of choice about how they deal with those issues with their kids. The issues in Jemez Mountain School District are different than the issues in Los Alamos. Okay, they have very different issues. Now, some of them are the same, but different. Anyway, so I think flexibility at the school level. The second thing is I think there has to be some accountability to that flexibility. The accountability should have what I call broad general guidelines with a lot of community input about what matters. And then I think that accountability comes with the flexibility. And finally, I think resources. Clearly, resources in our schools have been chewed up by things like Medicaid. Just absolutely bigger and bigger part. In fact, what I say to people, you can think of Medicaid as the Pac-Man of our budget now, of our general fund budget. But I think schools need more resources. And I think there's a way to get those resources. And part of the way to get the resources is to ensure that as much as possible, those resources go to the school and the school level. And so those are the three things that I would emphasize as a direct policy. And I can go into the details of how you implement those, but I think we're short of time. But I would just say again, those three things are flexibility, so that individual schools can set their own goals, they know, allocate their resources, as much flexibility as possible.
So more local.
Much more
emphasis.
local control,
And
okay?
control.
And both local control and local choice about what they want to emphasize and how they do it. Accountability at pretty broad levels. And you may, in the accountability, may come out for something fairly broad. Look, children should be able to read by 4th grade. Okay? And then we don't need a law saying you have to have all children read, but my gosh, I think we set this is a goal, and that's one of the things you measure in schools, buy into that. And so it's just an example. And then the third thing is we have to find a way to generate as much resources into this education system as we can. And by the way, something that was said earlier, I pretty strongly disagree with mandatory pre-K. I think that a lot of this is about parent choice, and parents have to feel for it. Clearly, pre-K in many instances can be helpful. From my own experiences, not much more helpful than parents with a direct interest in what I was doing and how I was doing. Anyway, that's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, Stephanie?
So I really foresee a system where we are focusing on children's unique assets that they bring into a classroom. We're focusing on rewarding and recognizing our top performing teachers. And we are setting high standards in a classroom. How do we do that? So I've talked about two programs that I would love to see implemented in New Mexico. And the first one of those is universal pre-K. So there was a long-range cohort study done, 30-year study, that really tracked folks that were in pre-K programs with graduating from high school, higher graduation rates, higher paying jobs, and attending university. And so we know that that is a program that works. Let's invest in that program for our kids. The second thing that I would like to see is, I said at the beginning of the talk, was an increase in VOTEC training opportunities for some of our kids that are not necessarily college bound. We have a lot of our branch colleges here in the area. We have UNM LA branch. We have a college at Northern, New Mexico Northern Community College. And all of those places are great spots to be able to, leverage programs that industry and companies are looking for, okay? They want to know that the workers they're coming after in a state are trained. And so what better way to have them be a part of all of this is to partner with them to invest in a training program. There are a lot of options available around that. There's a real growth in the green industry here in New Mexico, maintaining and installing solar and insulation and things like that on homes. And so that whole technical piece is very viable here in the state. So universal pre-K and VOTEC training. Of course that's going to need resources. And the bottom line is we are not yet up to funding schools to the level that we were in '08 when the bottom went out of the oil and gas industry here in the state. And so I would like to see a way for us to get back up to those '08 levels. Some of the things that have been proposed, I mentioned before, this having big box stores pay their fair share of state income tax. Some of that money has been proposed to be spent on schools. There is another proposal as well to have part of the interest on our state permanent land grant fund be put aside to be used for a universal pre-K program here in New Mexico. So those are two things that I would support.
Okay, well, Bonnie, I guess we've
Run out of time, Greg.
We've run out of time. We've hit the 45 minutes, which is what we were shooting for.
Okay.
Yeah, we had more to ask, but we were out of
Yeah,
time.
very, very good. We'd like to hear more, but
You didn't know we'd be so winded.
yeah.
Well, actually, let me just break in on that. These are serious issues for the
Complex
state.
issues.
I mean, these are serious issues. These are big issues for the state. I'm
You
sure.
can't answer them with a one
Well,
sentence.
no, we always use sound bites, but I don't think that does justice to the intelligence of our viewers. Stephanie and I could go for half an hour on every one of these questions, I think.
sure you could.
Yes, but you're not today.
Because we're done. I'd like to thank both of you for joining us and giving us your point of view on these important issues. We have 4 conversations on video with political candidates, our local political candidates, and we invite you to watch all of them. We have all the county council candidates as well as these 2 folks running for Congress.
State rep.
State rep.
Sometimes I feel like we're running for Congress, but thank goodness it's just state rep.
Your representatives, New Mexico State representatives for District 43. So be sure to tune in for all of our very interesting conversations with these folks who will be our future leaders.
Right. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.